The red and blue police lights flickered across my living room walls like a cheap horror movie. My dog, Max, a golden retriever with more patience than most humans I know, sat trembling by the door, whining softly. The knock came again. BM BM BM. Police! Open up! I yanked the door open, heart pounding, only to find 2 officers standing there, arms crossed, hands resting on their belts. Behind them, I could see her. Karen. She stood smugly on the sidewalk in her neon pink jogging suit, clutching a clipboard like it was a royal decree. Her arms were folded, lips pursed, and she didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. "This is the house," she said, pointing directly at me. "That dog is a menace. Aggressive. Dangerous. The whole neighborhood is at risk." Max wagged his tail. "Yeah, real dangerous." The officers looked past me, their faces torn between skepticism and procedure. And in that moment, staring at Karen's self-satisfied grin, I realized she hadn't just made this personal. She had made it public. But here's what Karen didn't know. I had already been waiting for this moment. And the trap was almost ready to snap shut. I moved into this neighborhood 3 years ago. A quiet cul-de-sac just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. One of those places where everyone waves from their driveways, kids ride bikes until sunset, and the smell of fresh-cut grass mixes with barbecue on Saturday afternoons. I bought the house not just for myself, but for Max. He's an 8-year-old golden retriever, the kind of dog that greets mail carriers with kisses instead of barks. The backyard was perfect for him. Half an acre, shaded by a mesquite tree, with a tall wooden fence that kept him safe. For the first year, everything was fine, until I attended my first HOA meeting. If you've never been to one, picture a school detention but with adults who think Robert's Rules of Order is sacred scripture. That's where I met Karen. Karen wasn't just on the HOA board, she was the HOA. Vice president by title, dictator by personality. She wore chunky jewelry that clinked whenever she pointed her finger, and she always had that clipboard. Her concerns started small. Your garbage cans can't be visible from the street. Your holiday lights must be removed by January 5th, not the 6th. And my personal favorite, your lawn is 2 inches above regulation height. Every comment came with a fine attached, $50 here, $75 there. Nothing devastating, but annoying enough to feel like mosquito bites you can't swat away. Then, one Tuesday night, she brought up Max. At the HOA meeting, in front of 20 neighbors, Karen tapped her clipboard and said, "We've received complaints that certain pets are disruptive. I think it's time we revisit our pet policy." My stomach sank. I knew exactly whose pet she meant. Karen claimed Max barked non-stop during the day. But here's the truth, I work from home. Max sleeps at my feet while I'm on conference calls. If he barks, it's once or twice, usually at the UPS truck. Still, Karen insisted she had multiple witnesses. No names given, of course. A week later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. Notice of violation. Your pet is in violation of HOA Bylaw 14B, Section 2. Excessive noise disturbance. Fine, $200. $200. For my dog wagging at delivery drivers. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about noise. It was about control. Karen had decided Max was her new crusade. And this was just her opening move. Because the very next morning, she escalated, and it involved a bright yellow envelope on my front door. The next morning, I opened my front door and nearly tripped over it. A bright yellow envelope, duct taped directly to the wood. Final notice, pet violation. Karen didn't even bother with subtlety. She wanted the entire neighborhood to see it. Inside, the letter claimed that multiple neighbors had formally documented Max's barking. If I didn't pay the fine within 7 days, the HOA would take further action. Further action? Against a dog that spent most of his day snoring louder than he barked? I crumpled the letter, shoved it into my pocket, and took Max on his morning walk. That's when I realized Karen wasn't working alone. 3 doors down, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly neighbor who always slipped Max biscuits, whispered. I heard Karen telling people she's going to have your dog removed. Said she already called animal control. Removed. That word stuck with me, like a nail in the shoe. I wasn't about to let Karen bully me, but before I could even plan a response, she struck again. 2 days later, I came home to find a police cruiser idling in front of my house. The officer walked up as I parked. "Sir, we've had a report about an aggressive animal on the premises." I looked over his shoulder. There was Karen, standing across the street with her phone out, filming like she was producing a crime documentary. "Max?" I asked, dumbfounded. "He's literally licking peanut butter off a spoon right now." Sure enough, Max poked his head out of the door, tongue still working the spoon. The officer glanced, stifled a laugh, and shook his head. "Look, I have to write this down as a check-in," he said quietly. "But between us, this doesn't look like an aggressive dog." Karen's face dropped when she realized the officer wasn't hauling Max away in cuffs. She shouted from across the street, "You'll regret this. The bylaws are on my side." The bylaws. That was her favorite word. Over the next few weeks, the letters piled up. $200 fine. $250 fine. Threats of legal action. Threats of foreclosure if I didn't pay. At the next HOA meeting, Karen called me out by name. Certain homeowners think the rules don't apply to them. But if you can't control your animal, perhaps this community isn't for you. Murmurs rippled through the room. A few neighbors nodded in agreement, but most just looked uncomfortable. I caught the eye of my next-door neighbor, Dave, who mouthed, "This is ridiculous." Still, Karen doubled down. One Friday afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and saw a tow truck idling at the curb. My stomach dropped. They were here for Max's doghouse. The driver stepped out, scratching his head. I was told the structure violates community standards." I walked him around back, where Max's doghouse, a small cedar cabin I built myself, sat neatly against the fence. The driver sighed. "This ain't even big enough to count as a shed. They wasted my time." I looked up at the window across the street. Karen's blinds snapped shut. That was it. Up until then, I had played defense, putting out fires, proving innocence, swallowing fines. But when Karen tried to tow a doghouse off my property, that's when I decided enough was enough. It was time to stop reacting. It was time to hit back. Because what Karen didn't realize was that I had been quietly collecting receipts, and one particular bylaw she loved to quote. It was about to destroy her. 4 weeks, I'd been quietly building a file on Karen. Every letter, every fine, every violation notice taped to my door. I didn't throw them out. I scanned them, dated them, organized them in a neat little folder on my desktop labeled HOA War. See, Karen's fatal flaw was also her obsession, the bylaws. She quoted them at every meeting like scripture. But here's the thing about bylaws, they work both ways. One night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading every single page of our HOA handbook. 86 pages of dry, soul-crushing legal jargon. But buried in there on page 64 was Bylaw 14B, Section 2, the exact clause Karen claimed Max was violating. And right beneath it, a line she always forgot to mention. Alleged noise disturbances must be verified by 3 separate households, documented in writing, and reviewed by the HOA secretary before fines are issued. Karen had skipped every step. No witnesses, no documentation, no review. She was fabricating violations out of thin air. And it didn't stop there. Bylaw 8C, Section 1 stated that board members who issue fines without due process can be personally liable. That meant if Karen was signing these bogus fines, she wasn't just harassing me, she was legally on the hook. I nearly laughed out loud at 3:17 a.m. when I realized it. Karen had built her little empire on a house of cards. The next day, I started gathering allies. I went door to door with Max trotting beside me, explaining the situation. Most of my neighbors were sympathetic. Dave, the guy next door, even admitted, "She's been fining me for my trash cans for months. Never thought to fight back." Within a week, I had signatures from 6 households stating that Max wasn't disruptive. 3 of them had Ring doorbell footage showing Karen walking up to my property with her clipboard. At times Max wasn't even outside. The evidence folder grew fat. Emails, timestamps, video clips, signed witness statements. It was my own little nuclear warhead. The hardest part was not tipping my hand. At the next HOA meeting, Karen was in full swing, waving her clipboard like a sword. "We cannot allow this homeowner to continue violating noise ordinances. His dog is a menace, and I have issued proper fines." I bit my tongue. Not yet. Instead, I pretended to be rattled. "Fine," I said. my voice shaking just enough to sell it. If that's how it's going to be. Karen smirked, thinking she'd won. But what she didn't know was that later that night, I sent a 27-page PDF, evidence, bylaws, witness statements, and video clips directly to the HOA president, the HOA secretary, and just for fun, the city attorney's office. The trap was set. All that was left was to wait. Because 2 weeks later, at the next HOA meeting, the moment finally came, and when the truth dropped, it wasn't just Karen who got exposed. The next HOA meeting was packed. Normally, maybe a dozen people showed up. That night, it was standing room only. Word had spread that something big was about to happen. Karen, of course, was basking in the attention. She wore a neon green blazer that practically screamed, "Look at me!" and her clipboard was stacked with papers she shuffled like a Vegas dealer. "Order! Everyone order!" she said smugly, banging her pen against the table. "Tonight we must address the ongoing issue of pet disturbances. Specifically," she pointed at me, "the repeated violations from this homeowner and his dangerous animal." Max wasn't even there. He was at home napping, probably dreaming of tennis balls. Karen launched into her performance, citing fake complaints, inflated fines, and quoting the same bylaw she always leaned on. Her voice grew shriller with every word. Finally, the president of the HOA cleared his throat. "Karen, before we continue, the board has received some documentation regarding this matter." Karen froze. Documentation. That was my cue. I stood, holding up a thick binder. "Yes, this documentation." Every head in the room turned. You could hear the air conditioner humming in the silence. "This," I said, flipping it open, "is a record of every so-called violation you've issued against me. Every letter, every fine, every so-called report. And here's the problem. Not one of them follows the HOA bylaws." I slid copies across the table. The secretary began reading aloud. "Noise disturbances must be verified by 3 separate households, documented in writing." Gasps spread across the room. I pulled out the signed witness statements, laying them down one by one like cards on a poker table. 6 households, all confirming my dog isn't disruptive. 3 even had video footage of Karen trespassing on my property to create fake evidence. Karen's face turned red. She tried to interrupt, but the president raised his hand. "Let him finish." I flipped to the last page, my voice steady. "And according to Bylaw 8C, Section 1, board members who issue fines without due process can be held personally liable. Karen, you haven't just violated procedure. You exposed yourself and this HOA to legal action." The room erupted. Neighbors whispered, some outright laughed. Karen slammed her clipboard on the table. "This is slander. He's twisting the rules." That's when Dave, my next-door neighbor, stood up. "He's not twisting anything. My trash cans have been violations 4 months. You fine me $100 because my kid's bike was leaning against the garage. Enough is enough." Others started chiming in. "Yeah, she fined me for a lawn ornament. She told me my curtains weren't the right shade of beige." The board president rubbed his temples. "Karen, is this true?" She sputtered, pointing wildly at me. "He's just trying to get revenge. His dog is a nuisance, I swear." And then, the moment that sealed it, the city attorney's office representative, who had been quietly observing in the back, stood up. "Actually," she said, holding up a copy of the evidence packet I'd sent, "we've reviewed these claims. Not only are these fines unenforceable, but this constitutes harassment. If this continues, legal charges could be filed." The room went dead silent. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Then the president dropped the hammer. "Effective immediately, Karen, you are suspended from the board pending further review. You are not authorized to issue fines or citations. And given the circumstances, we may need to pursue your removal entirely." The room exploded in applause. Neighbors clapped, some even cheered. Dave gave me a fist bump. Karen grabbed her clipboard, muttering curses under her breath as she stormed out, her heels clacking furiously against the tile. As the door slammed behind her, the officer who had been called to my house weeks earlier leaned over to me and whispered, "You know, that's the most well-behaved menace I've ever seen." Mic drop. But as satisfying as that was, the story wasn't over. Because Karen didn't take her downfall quietly, and the aftermath turned out to be almost as wild as the battle itself. After that night, things in the neighborhood shifted. For the first time in months, I could step outside without feeling eyes on me. Max lounged in the yard, tail wagging, finally free of bogus accusations. The letter stopped, the threat stopped, and slowly, neighbors started to treat me differently. "Hey," Mrs. Henderson said one morning, slipping Max a biscuit. "Good job standing up to her." "Someone had to." Dave waved at me across the driveway. "Man, you nuked her from orbit." "Beautiful." The HOA board sent me an official letter, but this time, it wasn't a fine. It was an apology. They admitted Karen had exceeded her authority and refunded every dollar she had tried to bleed from me. And Karen, well, she didn't disappear. 4 weeks, I'd see her sulking around the block, no clipboard in hand, her neon outfits suddenly a little less bright. Eventually, the board voted her out entirely. The word resigned went into the newsletter, but everyone knew the truth. The best part, the bylaws she loved so much now protected me. Max was officially declared in good standing. No more harassment. No more drama. Life slipped back to normal, barbecues, bike rides, the smell of cut grass, just the way I'd wanted when I moved here. But here's the funny thing about Karens like her, they don't really go away. They retreat, they regroup, and sometimes they come back swinging. And sure enough, a few months later, I heard a rumor Karen was plotting a new crusade. This time, it wasn't about my dog. It was about something bigger. But that is a story for another day.